Welcome back to Plant Pod. This is Robert Romej. We've got Makenna Ayres and Brian Hook. How are you guys doing?
So good.
Good.
Great to be with you.
Good. Great to be with you too. So we're talking all sorts of things about church planting in the past couple of podcasts and multiplication and stuff. So let's just get down to the nuts and bolts of a church planter. I would love to hear if someone feels called to plant a church, what are the steps that they take in order to actually get from that first calling to actually implementing whatever that church plant might look like? So could we talk a little bit about some of those real practical things?
Yeah. You know, I think you made a good point there. The word you used is feel, like they're called. I think a lot of people feel called towards certain things. And I think, planting is something that is so important. I think calling is everything. So really, I think that you need to first confirm the calling, And I think I think in Scripture it talks about being in agreement.
Yeah.
And so it takes somebody else. It's not just one person.
Right. I agree with myself.
Yeah. So it's two. And I think if they're married, I think they both need to be in agreement of that calling. So, okay, I'm called. Well, you're married and you're one, so you're both called. So
Yeah.
I think that's first and foremost, is to make sure that the spouse is in agreement, so that they're both called to do this.
What does that mean? Does that mean if the husband thinks that God's put something on their heart, then that the wife also has the same thing by God put on their heart? Or just that, that sounds good, or that sounds fun, or like I'd be okay with that? Like
I think it looks different. I think it's a really good question, though, because I don't think it is the wife is, at the very same time had the same vision, direction, pull. Typically, this is typical. This is not sure, but typically this is in marriage in general, not just church planting, but some
marriage podcast now.
Yeah. Sometimes the husband may have a certain call or vision, and then the wife typically is the timetable of that. It may take a little bit longer because the wife is thinking through more things than just one thing. Sometimes men, we're very focused on one thing, and I'm called. Okay, that's great, but how's this going to play out with our kids? How's this going to play out with our life? How's this going to play out with our finances? We're just had a discussion last night about being in debt, and now you're saying we're called to leave it all. And you know what I mean? So it could take a while, and sometimes the wife takes a little bit longer to warm up to that. It doesn't mean that she's not spiritual if she doesn't have that same moment at the same time.
Right.
But it does mean that give it some time, come to agreement. And so I would say if there's some men out there listening and you feel called to do it and you have a discussion with your wife, give her some time, look at the Scripture together, be praying about this together. This should be something that you guys are experiencing together. I don't think it's necessarily that she's now called to preach and teach or even, in the traditional way, do the women's ministry but I do believe that she needs to be called to support you in this. Like, she's supportive of it. She's very in it. It's not, she doesn't say things like, this is his thing, not mine.
Yeah.
Or it's his job. I'm not really into it, but he is, and I will support him in whatever he wants. That's kind of an attitude of, he's doing it by himself, I'm back here. No. You're in agree. You're doing this together. You're doing this together. So I think that the calling is important together. And I think at that point, then you bring that to people that you're with in community, in your church, because churches plant churches. So I think that you bring that, and that could be a dangerous thing sometimes.
What would be the appropriate people to bring that to?
I think if you're in a small group and you're with people in small group, I think that's a good place to start. Talk to people and say, God, I think is leading me in this regard. I don't think you should wait too long to bring it to your senior pastor, and know that senior pastor may not agree with you.
Yeah.
They may consider it threatening. They may consider it to be, you need to find another place to now go, because they may not want you to take people with them, which could mean money. It could be control. It could be, it's tough. Maybe you're a youth pastor And it's like, okay, we got to get this guy out of here. And I've seen it. You know, when
Yeah.
the pastor fires the youth pastor, they have to move on and whatever. Hopefully the pastor, though, is supportive. And the best thing that a pastor, I believe, can do if you're listening and you're a senior pastor is to say, wow, praise God.
Yeah.
Let's walk through this together. How can I be a part of it? And what are you thinking? You know, what's your timetable?
Okay.
I think another question is, what does your spouse think about it? What does your wife think about it? Can we go have dinner together and talk through this? You know, best thing that I had experienced was when we did this in Vegas. You know, Vance said, "Well, I would hate to lose you, you know, but man, I'm so happy. Are you sure?"
Yeah.
Man, I think that's a great question. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Like, you've done this before, right? Like, you train people. What are you doing? And Vance and I had lunch the other day, and we were still saying the same thing. Are you sure? like, wow, that's
Are
a
you
different
still
thing.
sure?
Like, this is incredible, like what God has done and how hard it is. And that's just something that pastors should do, is say, wow, are you sure? Because we know it's a big deal.
Right.
And we want to make sure that you and your wife, and I remember us having lunch just recently, and Vance said the same thing. How's Jessica doing? You know, because there's always this, we're in this together.
Yeah.
You know, hey, are you still in it together? Are you still loving Tucson? Is this still something that you want to be a part of? And I think that those conversations are good to have with your pastor. And, you know, we had many different conversations between me and Vance, but you know what he did is he allowed me the freedom to explore and to color outside the lines a little bit, and to dream, and to, okay, say it's going to be 3 months. No, it's going to be about a year. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And it took about a year for us to really come up with a plan and all that. And at the time, I was an elder at the church at Hope. And so I stepped out of that eldership for that year, because elders are about the vision and direction of the church. He allowed me to step out of the eldership and to focus in on church planting, which was a great train church planners,
Yeah.
and oversee missions, because that's what my heartbeat was.
Yeah.
Allowed me space to walk through this with my wife. Did not cut my salary, even though I was doing less work for Hope, and focus in on church planting, which allowed me to not worry about money and have to
Yeah.
go get another job. And now I'm
That's
not
so
really
cool.
focused on church planting. And then he took me to the Southern Baptist Convention, and within 2 days we had 15 partners
Wow.
for our
Praise
church
God.
plant.
Right.
And he was
That's so
introducing and
cool.
said, hey, so-and-so, come here. I want to introduce you. Hey, Danny, come here. This is Brian Hook. He's planting. I know you're a church planting pastor. I know you love helping church planting.
Wow.
This guy you need to support. So within 2 days, I had 15 partners.
Wow.
That's
so
amazing.
cool.
A pastor, senior pastor, doesn't need to look at this as threatening. They need to champion church planting with that person,
Yeah.
and to make sure that the calling is firm, that there's agreement there, and you need to champion church planting and give that person space and allow them to walk through that. Because ultimately what happens is your church will get behind that, and they will support that, and they will value you as a leader. If you're a senior pastor listening, they'll value you as a leader, and they will see you as not somebody that's threatened. When people
Right.
look threatened, they look weak. And you don't want to look weak.
Yeah.
You're not weak. You're a man called by God at that church. Push into it. Join God in what he's doing. That church is going to continue on. It's going to be fine.
That's
That's
really
so
good.
cool. That's so cool that is the response that you got from your pastor.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And all of the avenues that opened up for you. But to the aspiring church planner who feels the call, is in agreement with his wife, has talked to his small group. He goes to the pastoral staff of the senior pastor, and he's met with the opposite of that. He's met with, good luck, you're not going to find support here, which we talked about this previous episode. That's an unfortunate reality. That does happen. Churches who are not church planting churches,
Yeah.
and they're met with that. What do you say to that? What's your like, here I am, I have no resources. I
Yeah.
don't know where to go. I was born and raised in this church. This is
That's
all I've
good.
ever known. And now I feel this call, and what I thought was my support system is not supporting me. What do I do now?
Yeah.
It's
First
like,
of all,
am I wrong? Or
Right,
am I-
right.
Yeah.
first of all, I'm sorry
Yeah.
if that's you, because that does happen more times than not. But I would still do the honorable thing and I would respect the church, and I would respect the leader. I would
Yeah.
go off quietly. I would not gossip or cause
Yeah.
any kind of dissension among your small group. Your small group leaders and the leaders of that church, you're offended by what's taken place, and they're going to take on your offense, and they're going to make it worse
Yeah.
for you and for them.
Right.
And typically when people take on offenses, they take it to the extreme.
Right. Creates
And church,
division.
yeah, so don't do that. Just go off quietly, talk highly about your pastor. You don't have to
Yeah.
lie about him. Just say, hey, you know what? We came to terms, or we disagreed on some things, but at the end of the day, he is such a great leader.
Yeah.
And he is such a wonderful man of God. And I'm going to respect and move forward and
Yeah.
all that. Pray for us and all that.
Right.
What you'll probably get is some support from them. You'll probably get some prayers and some financial support from those people.
Yeah.
But letting that small group stay in place, letting those people stay in church, letting that pastor move forward, it's possible that you will, by your actions of humility, will, in the long term, draw that pastor's support and that church support in the long term.
Yeah.
And you're going to need that.
Yeah.
You don't want to break division. And here's something else to think through. How you exit there and how you start this church is how the next church that you'll be a part of will start.
Yeah.
So it will happen. So how you do this and how you maneuver through this is exactly how it'll happen in the future with that youth pastor at your church and all that. So if you're,
Yeah. That's good.
it just happens that way. That's how the kingdom works. It will be like you're doing. So
Yeah.
walk out how you want those people to act in 20 years when you're having that church.
Right.
Because it's going to play out.
You want to find a good off ramp, not a
That's
not a
exactly
crash landing.
Yeah, yeah. So honor them, do the right thing, take the high road. I would also find somebody in the city that you're planting in that is a church planting pastor, and I would go have lunch with them and say, hey, would you help me?
Yeah.
And let that person either welcome you into their church or find a church that may be part of church planting and wants to be a part.
Yeah.
And I would go find yourself a sending church, because churches plant churches. You
Right.
don't start churches. Your
Right.
church does. So go find one.
So how would that aspiring church planner find if his home church is all he's ever been a part of? How do you look for a church planting church? How does he find that?
Yeah, you may already have a relationship with somebody
Okay.
that can come in and adopt you or foster you. Adopting, would be, hey, you're part of us now, and sit under our leadership and go into our Bible studies and be under my leadership and come into our teaching team meetings, and I'm going to train you and teach you. That's adopting. You're in our church now. Fostering could be, you could go to the church that maybe you're going to a city, like, we were in Vegas, we came to Tucson, maybe, let's say it didn't go well at Hope. It went awesome. But let's say I came to Tucson, I would find somebody in our city that has a heart for church planting. For instance, Glenn Elliott here, Pantano, he was a senior pastor at Pantano. I could go to him and say, hey, would you help me? And I'm here in the city. I feel called to the city, but I believe that churches plant churches. So you can come alongside that person. It could either be where you are right now, find a church, or go to the city that you're going to be in and find a church, sit under their covering and leadership, and then let that church plant you out. That way you're under the authority of proper leadership structure and authority, and also you're
Right.
biblically doing what you're called to do. We're not
Yeah.
called to just go out
Yeah.
and just go on our own.
Right.
Dangerous things happen when that happens.
Yeah.
And you start something that kind of looks like a church, but it's not. It's like something funky about it.
Yeah.
The church is organic. We're called out from the church. And so if you're by yourself and you're out there and there's nobody really supporting you and all that, I'm not saying you can't plant a church, but you're going to miss out on some things, some support structure, some leadership, some things that need to be done to really plant a healthy church. So see if you can go find a place that'll adopt you
Yeah.
or foster you. That's what I would do.
That totally makes sense. So the first thing is calling,
Yeah.
confirmation, hopefully from your church. If not, finding leadership that you can come under. That could take time. That could take maybe a little longer than what you're expecting or wanting, right? But
Yeah.
you go through that process. What would be the step after?
I think it's important also to look outside of just your pastor. And I think for senior pastors listening, I think it's important, just because you believe the person's called and you believe the couple's called, I think it's good to get outside perspectives to look into that person, because sometimes we miss it, and to let them as a couple be assessed. And so we did that in Texas. We had assessment's been around for a long time, but we realized early on talking to some other denominations that they just weren't doing it well. And so we were seeing about 50% of church plants failing. And that's tough, but it's really tough when you have churches involved giving $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 and it's failing. And
Right.
you talk about hurting churches. A lot of churches don't want to plant churches because they've tried it before and they got burned. You know, they gave the guy $300,000 and he went off and bought some speakers and a lighting system and they're not there anymore. And it's like, I'm not doing that anymore. I'll spend $300,000 on something else. And so assessment's really important. So let's find out if this couple really can do it and use some standardization to do it. And I mean, that church has to be like everybody else, but there's
Right.
a lot of church planners that have tried it and succeeded. So let's have a standardization of where they are in the area of vision casting and entrepreneurship and ministry experience. And hey, can they lead somebody to Jesus, evangelism, and kind of put them against other planters in those areas and see how they, you know, and then let's get them together with their spouse too, you know, and to do this. So some denominations back in the day were doing like a 30-minute phone call and all that. That wasn't enough. And so I think it was 2009, we got together with 8 different denominations. And we brought a gentleman in named Charles Ridley. And we had 8 different denominations. It was either 7 or 8, I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that. It was 7 or 8. And we went through this weekend with Charles Ridley, who was a great assessor, and we set aside some benchmarks that we all would agree to in our different denominations. And we said, this is how we're going to assess people. And whether you're Assembly of God or Wesleyan, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that it's a couple of days. We're going to make sure that the spouse is there. We're going to make sure that we look at 10 to 12 different areas of assessing these couples, and we're just going to do it across the board.
That's so cool.
And we did that. We said we're going to do it. Now, some of our denominations didn't do that. You know, so there were some denominations that said, no, we do it right, and we're not going to do it. Well, they suffered for it. And so...
But you got 7 or 8 on board. That's
That's a miracle. I mean, call it what it is. That's a miracle.
It was a miracle that we all said, this is how we're going to do it. And
Yeah.
It was awesome. To this day, I think it was probably one of the greatest things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
That we all kind of agreed on that. And that's a really good thing. Like if you can agree that we're going to spend 2 days together, we're going to assess you on all these different areas, we're going to go down deep, and we're going to find out, are you called? Are you in agreement together? Do you know what you're doing? Like, do you know how to do this? Do you know how to lead somebody to Jesus? Are you going to quit after a year? Or can you raise money? Like if you're going to do a church that's going to have people and budget and all that, can you raise money? Have you ever raised money? Have you ever asked somebody to give to something and they've given it?
So you're actually kind of talking a little bit about what's in the assessment. Some of those
what it
points,
is.
right? Okay.
We're assessing them on that, and we're saying, can you do this? And can you raise money? Have you?
Some people are getting an inside peek then to an assessment.
Can you start
Write
a
that down.
small?
Write that down.
When did you start something?
Sure.
Like you're going to start a church. Like the hardest thing to ever do, from what I hear, is starting a business. To start a business, I would disagree. The hardest thing you can do is starting a church.
Wow.
By far. If I start a business, I can pay you and control you to do what I want. To start a church, you have to do the same things, but I'm not paying you. Now you might have a staff at some point and you can kind of control them, but even then you're not a great leader if you're trying to control them.
Right.
At the end of the day though, you're motivating 200, 300, 400 people to move somewhere and you're not paying them. Can you do that?
Yeah.
And that's
From the start.
Right. That's
From the
big.
start. Like, can you cast vision with people that are lost to go and follow this man, this God, Jesus, and to give of your life? And we're all going to do this together. If you come into an existing church, it's already kind of got it going. You already have 200 to 300, 400 people maybe. If you're a smaller church, you already have 20 to 30 givers that are moving in the same direction. In some ways, you come into churches and you're a pastor, just get out of the way. Preach your sermon.
Yeah.
Pray your prayers. Stay out of their way. They got it going. You start a church, you're starting a business, but you're doing it with people where you got to motivate them. as change lives, not paying them, but change lives. That's our motivation. We're going to see lives change.
Yeah.
That is so hard, and you better assess people on it because some people can't do that.
Right.
Most
really
people
valid.
can't do that.
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
people can't do that.
Yeah, what I don't hear you saying is, can you preach a really good sermon? Are you
that's a
like
good
super
point.
likable? People like you, want to be around you. You're funny. You're charismatic. I don't hear you saying those things. I hear you, in my head, making a distinction between pastor and church planner. You
Yeah.
might be a really
Yeah.
great pastor, but maybe church planning isn't for you. So I think,
Yeah.
maybe that's a good distinction of
Yeah,
that
that's really good.
calling
Yeah.
of maybe you feel called to be a pastor, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're called to be a pastor of a new church. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. I would say sometimes, and I'm just speaking on behalf of experience, and I've seen it, and I've done it myself. Sometimes you'll see somebody and they just have a great charismatic personality and they can attract people and they can lead people for a certain amount of time. Those are the people that need to be assessed more. Be careful of the people that can woo people.
Yeah, the magnetic personalities.
Yes. We need to go down deep. We need to open the hood and see what's going on there. Because you can lead people for 2 to 3 years, but can you lead them 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
Can you multiply yourself? Can you start a small group? Yeah, you might, but can you start multiple small groups? Do you really care about discipling, or do you just want to get people to hear you preach?
Yeah.
So I think it's you're right. I think it's you have to look at more things than just woo and charisma,
Right.
and you're the right age. I mean,
Right.
I wasn't the right age.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I wasn't. I mean, people when I started, people use this phrase all the time. You know, that church planting is a young man's game. That's
Yeah.
what they said. I don't know who said that, but the Apostle Paul would disagree with you.
I was just
He's
saying
about
that.
ready to die, and he says, "I aspire to preach the gospel."
Right.
Like he's at the end of his life.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we need some men out there, that are proven track record, that don't necessarily look the part, that don't.
Sure.
You know, if I wore skinny jeans, I would die. I would probably suffocate or something. I'm not that.
The skinny
I'm not
jeans and the
that.
flannel.
I got 2
The
pairs of
haircut.
sneakers. I don't have
Nice.
300. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
by the way, I think being young and being a church planner, we need you.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
also need those people that don't look the part.
Right. And I would say too, just for clarification, if you are called to be a pastor, not a planter, that's not like a lesser than.
Not at
That's
all.
not a lesser than role. Not making an us versus them distinction of like, these are all callings. Like you all have something that the Lord has called you to do, and church planning by no means is like the apex of that, calling. It's different. It's something
Yeah.
else.
And we're just talking, right? We're just talking. This is a podcast, so we're going to be as honest as we can. That's
Our
one of the
podcast.
things. This is one of our values for our podcast is let's be real.
Yeah.
I would say that we still don't do church planning right in denominational circles. If we did it right, there would be fewer church planners. We wouldn't be looking for we would be looking for fewer church planners. We would be looking for pastors to take the place of the planner within 2 to 3 years so that church planner can go plant another church and go plant another church. There's very few entrepreneurs that can do what we're talking about. There's a lot of pastors out there. And some of you planners, you have already maybe gone past your season at that church. And it's now time to hand that off
Yeah.
to a very capable preacher that preaches better sermons than you, that administrates that church and can take that church from 200 to 2,000. But you got it as far as you can go.
Yeah.
And it's time to move on. And that
Yeah.
happens. And I know we're just talking, and I know a lot of people are probably listening going, they're questioning your calling as a planter now. No, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to tell you that what I'm explaining to you is the New Testament way of going about
Yeah.
it. Paul wasn't the greatest encourager,
Sure.
but Barnabas sure was. Timothy was probably a better pastor than Paul. Paul planted churches, and he handed that off to
Right.
people, and he'd go and he'd plant another church. And that's a biblical early New Testament model. What
Right.
we do now is we say you're a church planter, you got to stay there for life.
Right.
Some of you church planters are apostolic, and you shouldn't stay there for life. You should hand it off to a more capable,
Right.
better preacher, better pastor. To your point,
Wow.
Right.
we're not cutting down pastors.
Right.
Some pastors are just incredible, and you are better at so many different areas of the church than a church planter.
Yeah.
But you can't start something,
Sure.
and it's hard for you.
Man, that's really cool. I think you're opening up my brain to think about it a little bit differently in the moment of just like, I mean, it makes sense though that God may equip someone to be very entrepreneurial that can start things
Yes.
like nobody else maybe,
Yes.
right? And
That's
so
what we want.
that's what you want in a church plant. So, because I think I've had it like, well, you obviously stay wherever you're at, which is true. You should stay until God says otherwise.
Right.
But
Yes.
Right.
on the same, like, oh, maybe this person's really good at starting and finding the right leaders to then take the mantle and keep running.
Yes.
That they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to be the same. They might. God
might
might
be.
have. They might be the right. But
Yeah.
that's really cool.
It all depends on your gifting, and we're just
Yeah.
talking. And by the way, if there's somebody listening from Aspire, I'm not leaving tomorrow. I'm not.
This is Brian's announcement of his.
No. And by the way, if you're a pastor and a church planner, and then you're said that you've made a commitment, you feel called to a city and that church forever, go for it.
Yeah.
And there are people out there. But I think it all depends on your gifting. When I just look at the main five, the overarching,
Sure.
apostle,
From Ephesians
prophet,
4.
pastor, teacher, evangelist. I think that I'm apostolic first, primary, and I would say that I am teacher. I can teach. But I'm first apostolic and teacher. Some, though, are apostolic prophetic. And those apostolic prophetics, they're great starters, but at some point you may want to hand that off to a pastor teacher that has that gifting, and let your eldership be the apostolic eldership that leads that church to the next season that they have.
That sounds a lot like the previous
Bible?
episode. Yes, sounds a lot like the open hands mentality again. It's
Yeah.
like that's not easy, right? It's kind of like your baby, right?
Yeah,
you
you're right.
you started this church and you love your church and you love the people, and now I have to let it go. Like that's hard.
not?
I can imagine that is, I've never been in that circumstance,
true.
but I can imagine that's so difficult. And so again, it goes back to the open hands mentality of like, well, this wasn't mine to begin with, God. This was yours from the get-go. This is your church. And so I'm going to let you do with it what you will, which is a really different mindset than I think most people have.
That's so good because you're right. It is so difficult, but it's only difficult when we're looking at it from the perspective of like this earthly mentality of
Right.
starting something. But like when you look at it from God's kingdom perspective,
Right.
if
Church
you at
is
least get
kingdom.
a glimpse
Yeah.
of that, it's like, this is just how he does things. He
Yeah.
created me in a unique way to start, or he created me in a unique way to multiply, to grow, or to whatever that unique thing is. That's fun. Then it's like, oh,
Yeah,
cool.
it is.
How cool.
And
It
we're
is.
just dreaming, okay? I'm 57. I'm not going to be, senior pastor of Aspire forever. But I'm just dreaming, and I'm dreaming for other guys out there. Wouldn't it be fun if churches would just say, you know what, we're going to plant a bunch of churches, and we're going to maybe someday send that guy out to go plant another one. We're going to keep him on staff. We're going to take care of him. We're going to let him go plant. And we're going to let them go plant. We're going to let other people, when we find apostolic leaders, we're going to let them go plant and do the thing. We're going to take care of those people and let them do what they're called to do. And here's the thing. When it's time, they get to hand that baton off in a very short amount of time to somebody else to pastor and teach that church. That's possible in certain scenarios. But if we all are open-handed about it, everybody's taken care of, everybody's okay, the body's taking care of the body, but ultimately Jesus gets the glory and the kingdom expands, and hundreds, if not thousands, of churches are planted. I think we have too many pastor teachers trying to plant churches, and they just can't do it.
Because they
And
don't have that apostolic.
They
Right.
can't get past the first 2 years. It's just too hard for them. And they're constantly wanting to preach to a living room of 20 people. Instead of just gathering up 20 people and hanging out together, having some hamburgers and casting vision for the future, and then ultimately getting to a point where you do have a service and all that. There's just too many pastor teachers out there that are struggling right now.
Does the assessment that you were talking about
you don't get to
rule some of that out?
Yeah, you won't get to plant a church. If you go to assessment and you're just a pastor teacher and not an apostolic leader, you're not going to be planting a church. If you go
Does
through
the
right
assessment look at those
Yes.
Ephesians 4, those gifts
Yeah.
there? Oh, cool.
I think that there are 4 different areas: entrepreneurship, vision casting, entrepreneurship, ministry experience, church planting, some aspects of church planting that you need, the aspect of multiplying and raising funds and all that, and then the evangelism. There's really only 2 of those areas that you can improve in. And that is ministry experience and evangelism. I can always get better at telling somebody about Jesus.
Yeah.
So if you haven't led somebody to Jesus in a few months, you can get better at that.
Yeah.
You can improve in that. We're not going to give you a bunch of money and send you out right now. Lead somebody to Jesus.
Yeah.
Show me that. At Aspire, I believe wholeheartedly, we don't support you as a church planter until we see some people that you've discipled. And discipling being you led them to Jesus and you discipled them.
Yeah.
Like you have discipled people, and we see that you can do that. I don't care whether you can preach, and I don't care if you can teach. Who cares? They're all over. It's great. I think it's wonderful, but that doesn't make you a church planter.
Okay.
That's my view. That's what assessors believe. But you can improve in those other 2. You're not going to improve in entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, with that comes, okay, 2 days ago was Easter. I've had a bad Easter. It was just terrible. Like we expected, a certain number and, 3 show up. And everything was a train wreck and all that. Well, Monday's still coming. If you're an entrepreneur and you're a church planter, no matter how bad Sunday was, by the end of the day, Monday, you're back at it again and you're excited.
Right.
You have some bounce back factor. Some people, it weighs on you for months.
Yeah.
If that weighs on you too long and it gets into Tuesday or Wednesday, you're not a church planter.
Oh, that's bold. Yeah.
Yeah.
The same thing's true for any area. Like if you're starting a restaurant and opening night didn't go well, are you going to close shop?
Right.
Some do.
Right.
There was a Mexican food place right down the street here. It opened up, and after a few months, it wasn't making it. And I went in there once, and I'm like, "This is terrible. You got to make some changes." I didn't tell them that, but I'm like, "This place is going to make it." You know it when it. If you can't make changes and bounce back from that failed opening,
Yeah.
you're not going to be there anymore. And the same thing's true with church planting. You got to bounce back. You have bad Easter. Move forward. April
What's the next
7th
thing
is
you're gonna
right
do?
around the corner.
Right.
Some pastors, they struggle with that. They think I gotta get, I gotta have a better sermon. It may not have been a better sermon. You may not have had any signs directing people. You may not have had any invite cards. How about 10 less hours of your 40 hours in preparation for your sermon and 10 more hours leading people to Jesus?
It's good.
That's a church planter. Some pastors are probably listening going, that is terrible. You need to exalt the word of God and preach the word of God and spend 40 hours. I haven't spent 40 hours on a sermon prep in 20 years.
Yeah.
It's more important that I am meeting people and talking to people and having a quiet time than spending 40 hours in exegesis of my passage. So if you are struggling with that, listening, you're probably not a church planter.
Which again is okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It is not
That's
a bad
okay.
thing.
That's
right?
okay.
Yeah.
They may have the teaching gift or pastoral gift, right?
Right.
But that is very much needed.
Right.
But very much needed.
Yeah.
And very much needed. But
And I love that people have that conviction too, that in their eyes, to preach Christ and preach him crucified, they need those 40 hours. They can't in good conscience rightly teach about Jesus and with authority speak about him without that preparation, which is a great thing. Like it's never going to be a bad thing for you to spend more time in the word in order to properly teach your congregation. Like that's a really good thing. So if that's the case, do that. Like be confident in how God has shaped you to be and the gifts that he's given you. Don't strive to be something that you're not. The Lord has all created us uniquely, which again goes back to the diversity. It's like we're all different. We're all given different gifts. Don't like envy someone else because they have a different gift.
Right.
Like the body is made up of different parts, and it says like the weakest are the ones that are given the most value, right? Like they have the most value, and so don't be sad with what the Lord has given you or desire something else, because all parts are important and add value, and the body cannot be complete without all parts.
Just find the right fit.
Exactly.
So then after your
assessment,
assessment.
I was kind of talking about assessment, and I think you move into training. And training can come before or after assessment, probably a little of both. If you're listening, I think you need to be assessed, but I think you need to train yourself, read about church planning, read books about church planning. I would encourage you to read a lot of things about the kingdom of God, read things about engaging your city. Abraham Kuyper's a great one, talking about domains, learning about church planting. Great authors to look at as far as discipling. Alan Hirsch has a great book, The Forgotten Ways. Shaping of Things to Come is a great book. And you say, well, Hirsch never planted, but he did a great job of looking at church planters globally and what they did to make disciples. So discipling is huge. Learning about the kingdom, put some good books about the kingdom.
Kingdom Calling.
Dallas Willard, Divine Conspiracy is a great book. Kingdom Shift by Jeff Christopherson, great book. Church planting books. Bob Roberts has a great book on church planting. So training yourself, but also going to trainings. We have a training that we do every year called Imagine. It's a great training. It talks about kind of a kingdom perspective of training. So I think that getting the right kind of training is important. That will help you learn from not only people that study church planting, but also from church planters. Hang out with church planters, learn from them.
And this all takes time.
It does. I would say from the moment you're called to the moment you're assessed and you've engaged in training, and also you're going to need to probably raise some funds, some partners. Unless you're just going to meet in your house. Even then, you're still going to have to raise funds.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to buy dinner.
Yeah.
Funds are important. So you're going to have to raise funds and learn how to cast vision and raise funds. It's at least 2 years.
Okay.
From the time that you're called to, it's at least 2 years. It could be as many as 5 to 10 years before. But at the end of the day, you can't really go too slow. You know what I mean?
Meaning it's okay to go slow.
It's okay. You can't.
Okay.
I talk to planners all the time that say we took it too fast. I think you could go too slow. Like if you raised a bunch of funds and you still didn't really start, that's a problem.
All this money sitting around.
And they made a commitment for 5 years. But typically you'll find people say, wow, we just started our worship service too fast. We didn't really have a foundation.
Excitement's high, morale is high. And
I got to get out there But I think at least 2 years.
Probably
but I think,
expectations too.
Yeah.
Everyone wants me to start this thing.
Right.
I got to do this now rather
people
than
are
later.
supporting me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And church pastors that are supporting you, they're going to want to see you preaching and baptizing and all that. But at the end of the day, the people that you're reaching, the people that are lost, they don't think you're going, too slow.
They probably like that you're spending time with them.
They like that. They like the fact that we're just eating together and hanging out. You'll lose some actually when you start the worship service because they're like, I like we're in the house. It's so cozy and we could just talk about Jesus and you could teach me and I could ask you questions and now you're preaching and going.
I can't get a hold of you.
I can't raise my hand mid-sermon to ask you a
It's
question.
okay to go slow. It's okay to go slow and take your time. It does take time, but you're being assessed. You're being assessed by your pastor. You're being assessed by other people that are strangers. You're getting trained. You're raising funds. I would not start a worship service unless I had like 4 to 6 small groups. So now you're started, and maybe you've got a logo, and maybe you have a corporate name, and you registered with the Corporation Commission, and you have your bylaws, and you have your beliefs, and you even have a few leaders. You still need to take some time before you start publicly. And I encourage people to make sure you have like 40 to 60 people before you start publicly, because once you open up, somebody's got to greet, somebody has to take the offering, somebody has to do the video, somebody has to lead
It's just
music.
practical stuff. Yeah.
Right.
It's just practically speaking, we think that it's just about preaching. Well, you can't do everything.
Right.
So the more people you have, very practically speaking, it's easier to do that large group setting when you have people.
Nor should you, right? You're
Nor
already
should you.
kind of
You
showing.
don't know
the
each
body of
other.
beliefs.
You haven't been discipled. What you're putting out there is what you've really built into them in small group. And if you don't have a small group, you haven't really built into them.
Right.
And so
So
it's good.
it can be done with less people, but to
can.
not burden those
It can,
people
and people
to
can do it, and people have done it.
right,
But I wouldn't burden those people.
right.
You know,
Have more people.
have
Makes
more
sense.
people. Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it.
Would you
And
say
that's-
that
that's it.
does that
That's if-
number ever change? Like if you're planning in a really big city versus a really small town?
It's a good question.
You know, I'm
Yeah, it probably does.
okay.
He's thinking
okay.
about it.
Probably does. Probably does. I mean, I think, I've, the newest trend now, if you're going to start a large group or a large worship service, is to have about 100 people, to do everything. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, if that's your plan and your goal, I land around 40 to 60 because most churches are going to be 200 or less, anyways. And at some point you can sit around for a long time and not having a celebratory time of worship and communion and preaching the word, which I think is very important.
Yeah.
I think having a large group where a pastor, you're hearing from him and you're sitting under that word and the teaching is there and all that. I think it's just exciting. I think it builds toward that. And it doesn't mean that that's the climax of your church. It just means that that's an important aspect of health, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And if you disagree with me, that's okay too. But I think that having that is important. So
Sure.
I think 40 to 60 is a good amount. Can you do it with 20 or 30? You can. People are going to probably do 2 or 3 things.
Jobs. Just know that, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're in a city of 1,000 people or something, real small town, like that's probably you may not get to the 40 or 60 or I don't know.
Yeah,
a
yeah,
good-
and that's
good
and by the way,
percentage of the
we're
city.
talking about
Right.
if you're doing kind of a large group type church. Some of you listening are doing a house church,
Sure.
and that's going to look a little different.
That's
for
true.
sure.
Just that entire culture just it may be better suited for some other kind of, it might look different, right?
If
That
you're
makes
listening
sense.
and you're in Ghana right now, and you're like, I don't even know what he's talking about. Find yourself a giant tree, go sit under it and have worship. I've been there,
Yeah.
and they weren't talking about having 40 to 60. They
Yeah.
were just talking about let's all gather together under the tree and worship God.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about an American church culture.
Sure. That's a good distinction to make too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think even if you're in Ghana and you've got a big tree and you've got 200 people underneath that tree, you still have leadership.
You probably
And you
do.
still need to
Yeah.
have smaller group units where you're meeting together to train them. And I think you do still need to have a group to start
Yeah.
that, whatever that gathering is under the tree or building or whatever. So I don't want to just talk about American church culture. I think you do need to have a process. I still think even if you're in a global church, framework, whatever, and I think that you still have assessment, you still have calling, you're still being sent out by the church. I don't think anything that I've said here is just American.
Sure.
You need to be assessed.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, you went from assessment. You talked about training. Talked about resources. Talked about
Yeah.
a group of people. Some of them become your leaders.
I think you need to be coached and mentored. I think there needs to be coaching. You need to be
Okay.
meeting with other people on an ongoing basis once the church starts.
It's not just a one-time training. You then have something ongoing.
Ongoing coaching. Coaching being, somebody that's going to ask you the tough questions of moving forward based upon your vision and direction. What are some things that you need to be doing? Mentoring, finding somebody that's older than you that's been further down the road to mentor you and to help you. I think that's an important dynamic of it.
That's cool.
Not long before you start to talk about church planning again. Within the first couple of years, 2 to 3 years, you're actually praying and dreaming about when that is.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Especially if that's your gift, right?
Yeah.
An apostolic gift of starting church.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Church plants now are way ahead of churches that are 40 to 50 years old now that have never planted. There's church plants right now that are already having grandkids and they've only been around for 7 or 8 years.
That's just
That's
so
exciting.
cool.
That's how you reach a city.
Yeah. Big time. That's so
good.
cool.
Are there any other points that we missed?
I'm sure there are.
Certainly.
But you at least listed some good
Yeah.
practical steps. Well, cool. Well, here I've got a real deep question for you. You ready for this one? I don't know if
Yeah.
you are. You may not be because you don't know what the question is.
Not ready.
All right. So we're talking all about how church is organic. It's an organism. It's not an organization. So Brian, what if someone out there who's listening, like myself, who can't keep organic plants alive? How do you think I'm going to do as a church planter?
Probably pretty shabby.
Epic fail.
Is that a sign? Is this a symbol that I'm not going to do well?
You know, it's weird. When we planted here, we literally were praying in a community, and there was like this garden, and we actually went and I realized I'd never really planted anything that lived.
Wow.
So literally,
Brutal sign.
we started a garden and we planted it. It's amazing what I learned from that.
Nice. Didn't the school that we meet at has a garden? Didn't Aspire do some work there too?
Yeah,
Okay.
Taught us how to plant, and you do learn a lot about abiding. You learn a lot about planting stuff. Yeah. So I had a lot of stuff.
There's hope if people can't keep plants alive.
There's hope
that a church plant can still make it. Okay, good to know.
There's hope, and I think you should stop trying to plant marijuana. I think you need to learn more.
Wow.
I'm joking.
Off the rails.
Wow. Well, I haven't. That's not
Now
what
they
we're praying
heard.
with, but now they heard it. Can't unhear that.
The authority will be at your
Cool.
house.
Well, thank you for all of
one
this.
authority. Just
The
one
authority. I am the authority. Knock, knock, knock.
Well, fantastic. Well, I'm glad there's hope for those such as myself that can't keep plants alive.
You can ask Makenna. What has she grown that lived? Have you planted something that's grown and lived?
You shook your head. Are you not good with
Yeah.
with regular plants?
Well, okay. In my defense, hear me out. We got a lot of plants our first summer here in Tucson. And if you remember, we moved back to California. Took all of our plants with us. All plants love California. They're like, what?
Yeah, they do.
Weather that's perfect all the time. Love that. Got used to that. We moved them back to Tucson. And they were like, no. I will not be. Yeah. So a lot of our plants died. But like I said, I don't feel like it was entirely our fault. I think they just really enjoyed the California weather and
there's
decided
some spiritual lessons.
I'm
there.
not a desert plant
I don't
anymore.
know what, but there's some lessons there.
Feels like there might be a sermon
there
illustration.
probably is. Absolutely. What is the most unkillable plant that you've killed?
That's a good question. I mean, succulents are pretty hardy.
Exactly, they are.
They are pretty hardy, and we have one that is on its way out, unfortunately.
no.
Her name is Stevie, like Stevie Nicks.
Oh, they've got names.
And
All right.
not all of them, some of them. And she was like our first one. She's an Easter cactus, and she is unfortunately on her way out. But we're propagating her, which is also right. She's multiplying,
There you go.
Nice.
right? She may die, like
But
our churches, but
That
she's
plant will
living
live.
on.
That's
There you
good.
go.
Yeah, I
Brought it back.
mine was a bamboo plant.
Oh,
Supposedly you can't kill those, but I figured out a way.
Wow.
And there's probably the sermon illustration is probably I moved it from one spot of the house to the kitchen, which is much warmer, and too fast of a move apparently killed it, and it didn't propagate. So that just died. Yeah,
that's just
died.
gone.
Just gone.
It is
So,
not living
No hope
on.
there. But anyway, thank you guys. I appreciate the conversation today, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Right.